So I work at CrossCom with Ben Roman in the back, and we're a small software consulting company of about 10 or so people. And yeah, we build a lot of mobile apps, and we build web apps as well. We have built an app for Forbes, or we did over the summer, which was pretty fun to be working on. So that was the 30 Under 30 app. We have a MetLife project coming down the pipeline. So we work with pretty big companies. We also work with really small companies. There's a company right now, Ben is heavily working, both of us are working on this app called Nomi. And it's basically, you could think of it as like a profile for people who struggle to communicate, people that may have intellectual or physical disabilities. And so it's a way for people to, or therapists like my wife in the back. Everybody say hi, Lauren. It's a way for therapists to basically say, okay, I've never met this person or this adult or this child, and I want to get to know their medical conditions or how we interact with them, what goals they may have, and things like that. So we work with a lot of different types of companies. And the fun part is Ben and I were both in the front-end web class, and now we're both like writing Swift. So it's a very different world, and I'm sure that's probably the case for a lot of you guys too. So tonight's talk is more than one way to skin an app. And the thought here is that, and it'll be pretty high level, I'm not going to get super technical, especially because Xcode project. But we will jump into Xcode a little bit, and then I'll jump into like a ReactNative code base as well to show you guys what that looks like and why it's like pretty easy for you guys to do it yourself. So yeah, we'll jump in. So web versus native, that's like a big, you guys have probably heard that debate before. Like it's a big thing in the community, in the web and mobile community right now because of React Native. And React Native came out last year, or was released fully to the public last year. And it's a lot different from a lot of the other web frameworks that are out there and that have been kind of available for a while now. And so the biggest difference is that it actually uses like native iOS components. So a lot of the other web frameworks kind of build their own thing. They try to make it look like that, but like the gesturing and the actual like function of the app and the native code, it just breaks down. And so the cool thing is the React Native actually uses an Objective-C and JavaScript bridge to actually to use iOS components. So it makes for a really, really interesting alternative option to native development, especially because it's cross-platform. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but you'll hear me talk about web versus native a lot tonight. It's also kind of a theme in my career. As I said, Ben and I did web, and I still love web, and I literally have a debate with my boss about it probably once a week. Ben can attest to that. But like it's like what business dictates, right? And so I'm sure that's probably the case for a lot of you guys. Anybody doing something else than what they learned in Anya? Sweet. What are you doing? I would love to hear. Bobby.
Python now.
Python?
Yeah.
Whoa, dude. So wait, tell me what you were doing.
I did the plumbing class with Bernard and Ben.
Sweet.
Yeah, mostly working back end now.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay.
Yeah, I was in the front-end class with young peaceful kids as well. I was a software engineering test, and now I'm doing DevOps.
Wow, that's cool. You and Jordan.
Yeah.
I think Jordan's doing some DevOps too. Sweet. May?
I was in the Ruby class, and now I have a Python job. Wait, as of 3 weeks ago.
I was in the Ruby class, now I'm doing English.
Wow. Cool. Two. Number 2.
I was in Ruby class, and I jobs mostly Ruby, but now I'm doing
Oh, sweet. So very cool. So I'm sure like we all thought we would go into a job that's like leveraging exactly what we learned in these 12 weeks and we're going to be like experts in it. But the cool thing I think about the Iron Yard is that it's like teaching you to learn, right? And like whether or not you feel really confident coming out of school, like you at least know how to learn and learn fast and learn in a really stressful environment, which is what software development is a lot of times. So that was a cool part. It was reality that you have to do some things that are different. But I feel like I was prepared for it. Hopefully you guys do. So one piece of advice, and I'll have 3 of these words of wisdom throughout, is to get comfortable with uncomfortable. Okay? So especially for like new grads. Do you have any new grads or folks that are in class right now? Okay, sweet. Especially for you guys, but also for people like transitioning and even folks that have been in the same gig since they left. Like, it's really important. My first day at CrossCom, I literally got on a conference call with our founder, and he said, yeah, so we saved all the styling for the Forbes app for you, so let me know when you're ready. We'll get you access to the code base. Not like hi, not like welcome to the team or anything like that. It was just like, let's go, you know? And so that was a pretty like eye-opening, like I didn't know any iOS, like had dabbled in it, but definitely hadn't done anything to the scale that I was going to have to do with the Forbes app. And so, you know, you have to get used to that. And for me anyway, I got okay with kind of being in flux every week, and I kind of had to come to grips with that. And that's something that you'll probably have to do in your career as well. So what have you guys heard about kind of the web versus like native debate? Any interesting thoughts or perspectives or anything there?
It sounds like it'd be really convenient if it were just all web.
Expound on that. It's very...
Then you just do the one thing and just do that. You know what you know.
Yeah.
You don't have to figure out what Swift is.
I like it. I like it. That's profound. Anybody else? Yeah, so that's like the thought, right? Like you would hope. Hey man, how's it going? No worries. That's kind of the thought, right? Like that you could write this hybrid code, like this code that would allow you to kind of bridge any extra learning that you might have to do and not like pigeonhole yourself into one thing. But the difficulty in doing that is obviously pretty steep and large, and it hasn't been fully solved yet. And so I have a quote or a couple quotes here. One, the web versus native debate is a lot like Diet Coke versus Coke. Try as you might, but you can't get anything to taste quite like actual sugar. I like that one because I'm from Atlanta. So. And then this is one that I feel like my boss would say this. When companies want to develop a beautiful, groundbreaking app, they choose native. Yeah, so it's like this like purist perspective that like to only have a good user experience, you have to have native code, and honestly, that's just not true. So a little bit of a spoiler alert, I tend to agree that the native experience is better. I mean, I think most people would agree with that. That's like not groundbreaking at all. And I'd probably get fired if I didn't say that. Like, now that that's what I'm doing. But that doesn't mean I'm not excited about like what's on the horizon with some web stuff. So we'll get into that in just a second. But why Swift, right? So Swift is king of the hill in iOS. And I actually really like Swift. After getting into it, I've been into it for maybe 2 weeks. Ben's in it for like the last 2 months maybe. And so if you have a question, ask him, not me. But it's pretty cool. So it's object oriented. It was the first object oriented language that I learned anyway. And it's like it's strongly typed. And for the JavaScript guys and girls out there, it's like a way different world. And I remember the like aha moment. I was like talking to Ben about like building this thing, and I was like, hey, so you mean I have to define it as an array and tell it the types that I'm going to put inside of it? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, no, it's so dumb. Like, I could just build this so quickly in JavaScript. I could say var x, and that could be whatever the heck I want it to be. But I'm starting to learn that like strongly typed languages are pretty cool. I mean, and my boss writes code and like barely tests it, and it's like so good all the time. It's because he like knows what he's writing. Like he knows it backwards and forwards because he's feeding it exactly what he knows is coming. And so the code is a lot better actually. So that part has been fun to kind of learn how to Swift. It also has an IDE and what's called Storyboard. Storyboard's like revolutionary, or it was, I guess, 5 years ago when it came out. But it's still just like mind-blowing. If you haven't played with Storyboard, like that's like your one thing. If you don't take anything away from this, is like go play with Storyboard. It's pretty sweet, especially for the like visual programmers out there. Like if you kind of have a design bent, or you want to, or that's just like the way that you learn or problem solve. Storyboard is really, really cool because unlike CSS, you can do logic in the view as well. And so the thought is you basically have these kind of components or these screens that you can create things, and then you can connect different actions based on the components that you have on the screen. So you can do kind of like some programmatic stuff, but visually, and it helps you lay out your project really well as well. So I would highly recommend it. And IDEs are kind of cool because it like helps you know exactly what method you're supposed to be writing, and Sublime doesn't do that. So IDEs are kind of cool. Yeah. They're Facebook, although Facebook's not really popular right now. They're coming out with a browser, not a browser, an IDE called Nuclide, or I don't know how to say that, but they're coming out with that, and like I think it's in beta right now, and it's supposed to be like a JavaScript IDE that really helps you out. So anyway, check that out. But it also has native components. So again, what I was saying, like with the user experience, like the gesturing of using the app is a lot better because of really well supported, stable code from Apple or libraries from Apple. And you tend to have a cleaner code base. Like it's just pretty straightforward, which is nice. And the user experience, as my boss would say, is just superb, is the best. So I want to jump into Xcode and just show you guys what it's all about. So over here on the left, you basically have like your project structure, right? And so in iOS, you have one project file, unless you're using like a workspace, which you have multiple, but don't worry about that. And essentially, you have several Swift files, and then you have this storyboard file. You could have multiple storyboards as well. And so you have this constant like MVC going on, right? You have this view that's very separate, but you can do some cool programmatic things with it. And then you have your controllers that are very separate and very distinct as well, which is pretty sweet. But the nice thing about the storyboard is literally I made this app yesterday in like 5 minutes. And it's not anything special, but just to illustrate just how easy it is, essentially you come down here and you have all these different components. These are native components. So you have view controllers, you have navigation controllers, table view controllers, you have all this stuff, right? So say we want to build a list of all the Iron Yard campuses in the world. We literally just drop a table view controller on the screen, and I have one here already. So you just drop it on the screen. That's how I got it there. And then what you would do is say, hey, I want to embed it in a navigation controller because I want it to go somewhere or do something when I click on it, right? So I need to have some element of navigation. It's literally that simple. So you just embed it in a navigation controller, and it pops this guy up right here. Once you have that, you basically can decide, okay, what do I want in this particular view controller? And so with your table view controller, you have like static cells or prototype cells. And for that app that I was mentioning, Ben and I are writing for the profile for people with communication kind of needs, like that has a prototype cells where we can basically make that cell whatever we want it to be. A static cell would be a basic list view, like your address book on your iPhone or something like that. But a prototype cell could be literally anything. You can create a custom cell and pop it in there. So that's what I did here. I'll show you what that looks like. So if we go over here, this is called a zip file, which a zip file is like a little small kind of encapsulated view that you can instantiate or bring up anytime you want. And so in our table view controller instance, I want to instantiate this particular custom cell as one of the cells in my table view controller, right? Kind of following? So the thought is I could have, so you have this table view controller, and each row is a cell. Sorry, I didn't explain that. So each row is a cell. So you can think of it as, let's say this is a newsreader app, right? And so this first is an article from the New York Times, right? And so this is like kind of the basic format. We're going to have a title and then like a description of the article. And that's going to be for each article all the way down, you know, depending on my data source, right? So you have what this kind of small view that's called a zip file. And then you have a Swift file, which is basically your controller, and you can do all kinds of actions within that custom file there. And so you basically just link it up in your main storyboard. You tell this prototype cell the name of your table view controller, and then you tell the cell itself that it's going to be this custom class, and it's pretty straightforward. So if you guys would like, I can run it. Hopefully it'll attach this time. Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention was I have an array of 5 articles right now, so that's why you see 5 things here. But obviously you wouldn't hard code an array of data, right? You'd hook it up to some kind of data source, Twitter or New York Times API or something like that, and that would then populate your table view controller. But literally, like in 5 minutes, you can create something that has a pretty good shell for pretty simple ideas, right? And so it's something that you could jump in and storyboard. Like we did very little actual code. Like we did a lot of visual stuff to make this happen. And it's pretty cool that you can just get something off the ground that quickly. Any questions about storyboard? I know that's like really fast, and it's not meant to like go into depth, but just to show you kind of a quick overview.
So how much of your production stuff is like drag and drop stuff like that? When you're talking about your other forms app, are you like starting with this, or are you going to like as your obviously? I mean, I would think your final production app is not just solely made with drag and drop stuff. But how does that kind of correlate in the development process?
It's a great question. And so to answer your question, it's yes and no, right? So a lot of times we get picked on and said, hey, can you make this button look better, right? And so Ben and I are the ones that make the buttons look good. But like for instance, we both had 2 big features that we wrote last week, and mine was adding a new row to your profile. So your profile has all these rows, and a row could be my medical conditions, and another row could be my likes and dislikes and things like that. And so I had to create a screen that would pop up when you click Add in the top right, and it would give you an option for all different types of rows that you could add and different content that you can add within that. And so part of that was exactly this. Like that's how I made this so quickly, because I just did it last week. And so part of it was setting up this prototype cell, but you're not like hard coding in the storyboard, right? You're not like saying, hey, I'm going to have 5 cells. I'm going to pop 5 cells into this view. You're basically just setting up like a view that gets you to the point where you can start to get into some actual code. And so the thought is, if I have one cell up there, that prototype cell that I was telling you about, then I can basically take this and reuse it over and over and over for whatever my data source is. And so in my instance, we have like 20 different row types that you can add, but my storyboard looks just like this, right? And so it depends on how complicated your app is. Like sometimes you may do more in here because just like it's easier and you have a pretty static app. And then other times you're going to do a whole lot. Like I did a whole tour tutorial last week, all in code, like no storyboard. Because we wanted to leverage like that view all over the app. So like if you clicked help somewhere else, it would pop up that view. And so we needed it to be a little bit more flexible than just being in the storyboard. But it really just depends. And there's a lot of like, you know, there's a senior developer that just started at on our team, and like he's just getting into storyboards, so like he doesn't really use storyboards a whole lot, or he uses them a whole lot because he likes to learn. Like, and so our projects look different just depending on the need. But yeah, great question. I realized that stress and like pressure situations, like I could handle them, but it wasn't the best way for me to like learn and experience from. And so for me, when we have like big deadlines like we did with the Forbes app, I like now kind of go into my own solo mode as well. Like I'll go into a different room, or I'll go into a different section of the building, or I'll put my headphones on or whatever. And for me, that's like helpful for kind of concentrating or whatnot. We also do a lot of Udemy courses, or at least we start a lot of Udemy courses. And I love Udemy, and there's a ton of resources out there for Swift because Swift is such a easy language to write. Like it really is easy to learn. It's not Objective-C. That's a nightmare. Swift is like really, really cool. So I would say check out Udemy. I can send you some links, and I can have those in the.
Do you know if they're still having that sale? $10 sale?
They literally have it like every other week.
Yeah. There's always like coupon codes, I just went on.
Yeah. So yeah, Udemy, check that out. I also like realized that I'm a pretty visual learner, so I find myself going to a whiteboard and like writing out pseudocode like all the time. And I didn't really know, like I didn't do that here at the Earner because you don't really have your own whiteboard, right? So like you're sitting next to people, and that just wasn't how I problem solved really well. So a lot of times I would like leave in the afternoon, and people, especially Zach's like, you don't want to hang out with me, man? Like what's going on? And it wasn't that. It was just like that's not how I learn, you know. And so now you'll see me like with my headphones like bobbing, and I'm like doing pseudocode on the whiteboard in our office, and like that's how I like get the juices flowing. And one of the really cool parts about working at CrossCom is that we get so many different projects that come in. And so another thing that was fun to figure out is like collaborative like learning as well is really high on my scale. So like when I talk to my boss or our founder about UI and UX design, like I learn a ton because we're just talking through and we're iterating as we go. I'm a verbal processor, and my wife is not, and so she would say that that's not as welcome at home, but at work, like that's what we do all the time. So I would say like challenge you to like do like a skills test or a personality test or something like that, and figure out like what type of learner you are, because that's going to really benefit you kind of in this career. I mean, that's what we do every day, right? So I want to do a quick poll. Okay, we're gonna do a little demo of. By the way, this is a quick tip. If you launch QuickTime and then go to start a movie, like a new movie recording, and then hook up your phone, you can like live cast your phone. So the question is, which of the two apps that I'm about to show you are built natively with Swift or with JavaScript? Okay. So this is the Facebook Groups app. Probably shouldn't have told you that. But yeah, you have a standard tab bar controller at the bottom. It's showing you how to discover things. You have a nice, this is a table view controller, as you can see. These are what we just talked about, cells, and they basically just populate based on a data source, right? So those are reusable components. You can search here. There's another table view controller here. Settings, all kind of good stuff, right? All right, that's that one. This one is made by Discovery, and it is basically like a VR like library. Just really fun. I've been playing around with that a lot. Yeah, like virtual reality. Yeah, so for instance, let me show you this video. Hopefully it will work. Go.
It's going.
No.
Oh, there it goes.
Like posters.
What? I'm a big fan of VR. You feel like you're there, right? I do, anyway. So we're in Austin right now. This is an art installation downtown in Austin, and you can you're standing. That's where we are. It's cool, right? So anyway, that's that app. So, show of hands. First one or second one built with JavaScript. Sorry, that doesn't work. Sorry. Is the first one built with JavaScript? The Facebook Groups app. One person, 1.5 people, 2 people.
Which one's?
Facebook Groups, the first one. Was that built with JavaScript? The first one. Okay, a few more hands. The second one, was this built with JavaScript? A lot of unknowns. Got an Iowa caucus here. That's great. So, actually both were built with JavaScript, right? She's like, I knew it. He's like, I knew you were gonna do that. So, pretty impressive, right? Do any of these components look non-native to you? I think a lot of web apps that's a modal. That's a very smooth modal. That's straight up native, And this is a menu. That's really cool animation. Really easy table view controllers. So the point here is that React gets you pretty close. It's not native, but it gets you really, really close. And the thought here is if you don't need the very, very specific things that you get with the iOS API and the things that Xcode gives you, if you don't need those things and you have a pretty basic app or an app that can leverage the things that React Native can actually give you, I honestly think it's a really good alternative, especially because you have the same code base. Yeah. You have the same code base for Android and iOS. So the way that React Native works is you have these components. I'm not going to go into it. But you have these components that basically you tell it, I want a tab bar controller. And based on Android or iOS, it pulls up the native component for that particular platform. So the thought is you could have this really great single code base that you can use for cross-platform and really strong cross-platform. So I think it's definitely growing. The components aren't all there, right? You have to build this Objective-C bridge to get it to work. The way that this builds in Xcode is through a JavaScript bundle file that you have to have on an external server somewhere or wherever you want to have it, but that could take a long time to load, so the user experience could be a little weird. There's some things, but I think it's the closest that we've been to a really strong cross-platform, but using JavaScript to write it. There are others like Xamarin, right? But using JavaScript, I think this is the closest. And the really cool thing is you can use CSS. You can literally just style a component really quickly like you would in the browser, and it works. It just works. It's pretty sweet. There's a faster dev cycle with React Native, and the thought there is obviously you're sharing a code base, right? And obviously you have to be kind of up to speed on React Native for it to be a faster dev process, but dev cycle. But I think that can be true for sure. It's extendable, so the thought there is that you could literally encapsulate your React Native code into one view. So if you wanted to do a tutorial screen that had crazy JavaScript animations, and you didn't want to learn core animation, which is iOS's animation library, which I'm having to learn right now, and I'm I don't want to do this. You could do that in JavaScript, and you could literally tell you can instantiate that tour view in your iOS app with just this React Native component, and it would all be written in JavaScript. And so you can basically treat it like a separate part of your app and still write native code. And this is the part where I started to get my boss's ear. I started to get him to start thinking about it, because we could kind of separate concerns a little bit for the stuff that may change a lot for our customers. So like we deploy apps and like we're pretty much like long-term partners with the people that we work with. And so for Nomi, for instance, like she may add different row types and may add different content and different help messages and whatnot. Instead of having the typical process is you submit to Apple and 2 weeks later, hopefully, you get approved and it gets released, right? But that's a crazy cycle, right? That's like way too long to make a change, especially if it's like a big change or a big bug or something, right? So you can do continuous deployment with React Native. And that's, I think, the coolest part about the entire thing, is that you could literally, I can send out the links, but they're like platforms as a service that will, when you get push, it then deploys it to your apps in production. Like, that's just like okay, that's amazing. Like, let's do that like tomorrow. And again, this is like where my boss was like, okay, I am a purist. Like, I would never do any of this, but I could potentially do that. And that was cool to kind of get him to go that way. I was gonna build a React Native. I'm not gonna do that, but I will show you the code base really quickly. I'm a Sublime guy now. I know we were like Adam when we were here, or I was, but. So the basic structure of a React Native project is you have your different cross-platform folders here. You have your node modules, so this uses npm. And so if you've done any React at all, this is pretty straightforward. It's a pretty basic example. But you have these like components, and you create these classes, and like I don't know a ton about React, so I'm not going to pretend like I do. But it's like you write this JSX, which is essentially.
Could you just
oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's totally
Much better? Good. Thanks, Adam. You write what's called JSX, which is like JavaScript extension language. And so you're writing HTML and JavaScript, which just like feels dirty. It just like, it doesn't feel right, but React does a really good job. And one of the things that React does is like you can use the same code base server side and client side. And so the thought there is if you can, they have this concept of the virtual DOM where they're not writing to the DOM directly all the time. They're writing to this virtual DOM, and the virtual DOM, depending on state, determines when it like prints it out to the real DOM. Right? That may not resonate with anyone, but that's what's happening. And so because you have these like containers of code, like let's pretend this was one of the cells in that table view controller, right? Because you have it like this, you can literally just reuse that anytime you want throughout the React app. And that's very similar to like how you would develop a real app. And so they're even like kind of patterning, around like the paradigm of what you would do like natively as well. So it's a pretty cool alternative. Definitely approve. So lastly, I know I'm kind of running out of time here. Number 3 is to just do it, man. Like just do it. Like if Phil Knight was in here, he'd approve. That's the founder of Nike. So. Developer community. So just like get out there and try stuff. Like I think I was pretty adamant when I joined CrossCom. I was like, I want to do web. That's like what I just spent $12,000 to do. Like I want to do that and I want to be good at it. And I had to be broken from that a little bit. And when they like forced me into these stressful situations, it was really, really good. Like I have enjoyed every single moment at CrossCom. Not every day is awesome, but like on the whole, it's been a really good experience. And it's because like my boss tells me to just do it. Like he just tells us to just do it. Like figure it out. And I think that's like not everybody responds well to that, but I think it's something that if you do respond well to that, it really challenges you, encourages you to get out there and try something different. React Native is pretty cool. It's pretty simple to get up and running like a sample app. I would definitely recommend using it and seeing what you think. And if you're a purist and you like native code, try out Swift because it's a really fun language as well. I'll leave you with like a metaphor. Okay, so bear with me. Let me pull it up here. So it's a little cheesy. So we're all working up a hill, and there are a lot of people farther down the trail than us. Sometimes we'll be given a new project, and that hill will feel a lot steeper. Sometimes our work will be full of bugs, and it'll feel like we're slowly trekking up the hill in feet of snow. But each day on that hill, we're exposed to more and more things. New languages, new build processes, new teams, frameworks, parse, or maybe Firebase instead. But that's our industry, right? Like we get to keep learning every day and get paid to learn. Like that's pretty cool. Eventually, the hill will start to level out, and we can look back at that path and the expertise that we carved out for ourselves and be proud of that. But to get there, you have to get comfortable with uncomfortable. You have to figure out your learning style, and you have to just do it. So let's go build some apps, y'all. Cheesy, yes. Thanks. Any questions?
So, you pointed out that you give a shared code base. Why is there an Android and an iOS file?
So it's a directory for those particular IDEs. So let me back up.
But index.android and index.iOS.
Oh, right. Let me back up here.
Seems like two codes.
Yeah. So I don't know. One, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. But that is it.
It's like exactly.
Yeah. So the thought is like the IDEs just treat the directory structures differently. And so you have to like initialize the different components differently with the different IDEs. You have to build with the IDE. I may have glossed over that.
Yeah,
so you have to use Xcode to build it. And what happens is it spawns this like JavaScript build process in the command line, right? And so it runs that, and then you run the project through whichever IDE you're using. So that's probably why.
Yeah, I follow you have to make that intermediate step to make Xcode or a simple thing called Android.
Yeah.
But I guess I was just pointing out the fact that we have two JavaScript files.
Yeah. That's a great question. It's probably because they're different bundles and they have to look at different directory structures. That's my guess.
So you mentioned like a tab UIU or something like that. That's iOS terminology, right?
Yes, sorry.
So that same like tab UIU component works the same in the bundle without any modification.
Yeah. So
like paperless.
yeah, it does. It does. I mean, it's not perfect, and so there are tons of it's a pretty active developer community. Like Zach was telling me about it, and I was looking at it, and they literally pushed a new release like yesterday as I was like doing this. And there's a lot of people like on the Facebook team, but also just in the larger community that are just really excited about React Native. So there's like a site of like a ton of components. I'll actually just pull it up really quickly. And pull it over here. So this is like the community building these components, right? And so you can reuse some of these for the other platforms. And so the thought is, like, hey, both platforms have some sort of activity indicator, right? And so can we write it in a way that you can use them both? And these folks are the ones that are doing it. So there's a ton out there to just try out. It's not going to be perfect right away, but it's pretty good so far.
In what way is it different than the home gap approach as far as some pieces that are shared or not?
Great question. I hate PhoneGap. Please don't ever use PhoneGap.
No.
I'm sorry. If that offends someone, I'm sorry. So PhoneGap and what's the other one? There are a ton. Titanium, yes. Ionic is another one. So the typical ones basically just do like what's called a wrapper. And so you're wrapping a web view. Like you are writing all your code basically like a web app. And it's perfectly the right size and whatnot. It's responsive and whatnot. And then when it ports over to like a simulator, it's actually just wrapping it in a web view. Like it's wrapping your web app in a web view so that it runs on iPhone. And so it's not really leveraging the true iOS components. And so what you're building is like a jQuery mobile menu instead of an actual menu. What you're building is like, you know, an unordered list instead of a table view controller, right? And so it's basically HTML. It just looks good. I wouldn't recommend it. I honestly, I think now that React Native's out, like there's almost no excuse to like settle for a really subpar experience. That is a subpar experience. You should not like masquerade a web app as an actual iOS app. And that's where my boss would say, proud, good on you for saying that. But like, I think with React Native, because it's an actual bridge, like it's no longer like masquerading as a web app. Like it really is native. It's just written with JavaScript.
So you're in a unique position having just learned front-end tech, then immediately diving into some iOS, and then just diving into React recently. Where do you think the threshold is for like looking at the learning curves you observed in all three of those technologies? Like, what is the threshold at which you might as well have just learned iOS or Android? And do you think that in its current state or the trajectory it's on, is at a point where it'll make sense to learn React as opposed to those other technologies?
That's a good question. Full disclaimer, Ben asked me that earlier today. I told him, please ask this. If no one's asking questions, I'm gonna plant you. So I have a different answer though. So that's the redeeming factor. I have a different answer. I honestly, it's funny. If it was Objective-C days, I would say React all day, because Objective-C is like just so weird. Like it's, I don't know. I thought it was pretty weird. It's a hard language to learn as your first language for sure. But with the like ease of use of Swift, like I mean, you and I know we're learning right now. It's like pretty fun. It's pretty easy, pretty powerful. It's really descriptive language. Like it's pretty easy to understand what's happening. So full disclosure, like I built that like newsreader app, albeit it didn't look good, but I built that in like 10 minutes and struggled to build these React Native things for probably like an hour and a half, because it's like being developed on. It's like even a tutorial 4 months ago is kind of outdated. And so like, oh man, that had that dependency and this dependency, and now I have to update this and like downgrade this and like all this stuff, right? So it's at this point right now, I would say like it depends on the project that you're building, right? And that's probably my typical answer, kind of a cop-out. Like it depends on the project, really. I truly do think if you don't need like all the things that iOS gives you, like try React Native out. Because, for instance, no one on our team, except for Sean, knows Android right now, right? So if we had to build an app that was Android, like we'd be learning Android. And is that really what we need on our team? I would argue yes for us, but maybe not for other companies, right? And so if you are a web shop and you build websites, like React Native is a really cool opportunity for you to say, hey, to your clients, or a new product, or something. Like let's leverage the skills that we have and build something with our technology. So it depends.
One more. So is React Native just like React for the web, where it really is only trying to handle the view component? Right, so phone gap exposes a lot of native functionality. Say I want to kick out the camera, say I want to kick out, separate button press. Does React give you a bridge to handle that stuff, or is it expecting you to hand off to Swift or Objective-C?
No, so yes, you can access it. I would say though, just to go backward, React can be used like server-side as well. Like the views could be used to render the first and then to re-render. Yes, from the native side, like I wish I had more time to show you, but like, yes, you can access a lot of things, and button presses and scroll views. Like, for instance, if we can reload this, a really good example is this scroll view down here. So this is a vertical scroll view, which is like not hard, but this one's a horizontal one, and that's like an iOS component, right? And so there's a lot of really cool stuff, especially button presses are definitely in there. There's even like long gestures, long tap gestures and stuff. So, yep. Because the thought is, right, you have that bundle file, and then once you have that Objective-C bridge, you can get to anything that is Objective-C. So it's pretty cool. Check it out. Sweet. Thanks, y'all.